I heard a funny story about economics that goes like this. If an entire country were an airplane, economics would be like the airplane's engine, one of the most troublesome, complex, and intricate parts of the plane. But that's not the biggest issue. The biggest problem is that everyone on board, including the pilot, flight attendants, and passengers, thinks they understand how the engine works and tries to have the mechanics fix it according to their own ideas. In reality, economics isn't that complicated. It revolves around the following issue: resources are limited, and society must figure out how to distribute these limited resources most efficiently. Economics starts by finding solutions to this problem and becomes more complex as human society develops and grows more intricate. You know how it is: the more people there are, the more complications arise. We need to note that when we use the term efficiency, we don't mean reasonable or popular. But what does efficiency mean? Efficiency can be understood as helping the economy develop in the best possible way. This means the concept of efficiency varies from country to country because what's best for one nation might not be the best for another. For example, in a previous article on Reddit, I discussed a policy in Sweden that prioritizes efficiency over reasonableness by imposing higher taxes on wealthy individuals who commit financial fraud. Poorer individuals committing the same offense pay less. Clearly, the wealthy might feel this is unfair and discriminatory. However, the Swedish government does this to reduce the wealth gap and distribute resources more effectively within society. However, this isn't a common scenario. Typically, policymakers strive to create policies that are both reasonable and efficient. Most politicians, though, tend to focus on making policies popular to get elected, often promising unrealistic or appealing things, like proposals to force tech companies to bring jobs back to their home countries. If you ever hear the term popular policy, remember Singapore's government motto: the government must do what is right, not what is popular. Of course, it would be amazing if a policy were both right and popular. This article focuses on the economy, and let's start by exploring some commonly discussed issues. The economy runs on trust. No, this isn't a sarcastic remark, it's a statement. Surely, many of us know someone who always says that society no longer trusts anyone, that business must involve deception to be profitable, and that being honest in business only leads to losses. Then you open a major news website to read an article about fraud and feel pessimistic about society, thinking that being honest only leads to losses. But cheer up! In reality, honesty among people has helped create the modern society we live in today. It's the trust people have in each other that has built a prosperous society. Let's delve into this issue by looking at the history of banking. Banking has existed since ancient times, but was quite fragmented and lacked a clear system, often being private. Later, Jewish people began developing a banking system, or commercial banks, in the Middle East to facilitate trade. In Western Europe, banking started to flourish again after the Roman era to support the Crusades. Here's a map of the Crusaders traveling from Europe to Asia. Back then, this journey was long, taking about 6 months by sea and even longer by land. When the Crusaders reached Jerusalem, they naturally needed money to spend, and the king needed funds to pay the administration. But how could they transport the money? Clearly, carrying large amounts of money, mainly gold and silver at the time, by ship or on land was too dangerous. They could be robbed or face disasters like storms, diseases, or theft. What about merchants traveling to the east? They couldn't carry bags of money with them. To solve this problem, a deposit and withdrawal system was established. Before leaving France, you would deposit your gold in a church bank and receive a stamped certificate. You'd keep this certificate safe, carry it on your long journey, and upon arrival, visit a local bank branch to present the certificate and withdraw your money. Sounds simple, right? But remember, this was the 12th century, and laws weren't as strict as they are today. The church had enough power and authority to refuse to return your money. They could lie about disasters happening and claim they lost all the funds, or they could evict you without reason. After all, how could you, a merchant far from home for 8 months, possibly fight against them? You might not even speak the local language, be an unfamiliar foreigner in an Eastern country, and the king wasn't there to help. The local judges could easily be bribed by wealthy individuals. They might even return counterfeit gold. There were too many opportunities for the local bank branches to swallow your money and force you to beg on the streets. But they didn't do that. You presented your deposit certificate, a crumpled piece of paper with the church's stamp, and the bank employee, after thoroughly verifying your identity, returned the exact amount of gold, and it was real. They didn't deceive you. Thanks to this honesty, the system gained the trust of users, kings, and officials, allowing it to exist for over 100 years until the Knights Templar were disbanded in 1307. That's how the banking system started. It began with bankers building a reputation to reassure their customers to deposit money. Just over a century ago, the biggest concern for depositors was whether they could withdraw their money. Now, you can deposit money comfortably without worrying much. Instead, you're usually concerned about whether the interest rates on your deposits are increasing. You might not realize this because so many systems have been built to ensure customer trust, including legal systems, police, courts, and information systems. But everything still revolves around one thing: trust. Imagine you're studying abroad in London and open an account with HSBC. You deposit $100,000. But why would you trust them with your money? The bank employee handling your money doesn't know you. You don't know her name, and she might even have a name that's hard for you to pronounce. She doesn't speak your language. She might have different physical features, and you're thousands of miles away from home, standing in a building full of strangers, handing your money to a stranger. Why would you trust them with your money if you don't believe you can withdraw it and withdraw all of it when you want? Another example of trust that you might not realize is money itself. The interesting thing about money is that it only has value when you use it. It might sound strange, but if you put a $100 bill in a locked drawer and never touch it, does it really have any value? Here's a $100 bill. The question is, what makes a $100 bill valuable? The paper itself isn't worth $100. The printer only costs a few cents to produce such a bill. Its value comes from the government declaring it as legal tender. Literally, the government tells you, the central bank declares that this bill, with color ABC, size XYZ, printed using method MNP, made from material EFG with specifications, blah blah blah, is worth $100, and everyone should use it as if it's worth $100. And you trust the government, right? You might say you don't trust them, but when you use a $100 bill to pay at a store, you're trusting the government. The $100 value of this bill depends on the government and the people's trust in the government to keep it in circulation. To make it clearer, imagine one fine day you wake up and the government disappears, okay? This is just an economic example. I'm not trying to cause any chaos. What do you think would happen to that $100 bill? It would turn into worthless paper. No one would use it anymore. And that $100 bill that could have bought you a fancy dinner suddenly would have no value. This is why the Reichsmark of Nazi Germany became worthless after 1945. Why South Vietnam's currency turned into junk paper after 1975. And why Soviet rubles disappeared after 1991. If money itself had intrinsic value, it would exist regardless of whether the government does. Just like gold and silver, which have always been valuable despite changes in governments. New Yuan Dynasty gold is still valuable today, regardless of numerous political changes. But has there ever been a case where people didn't trust their government and stopped using their country's money? Yes, when people believe that their money no longer holds value. When we talk about the value of money, we must relate it to tangible assets. Money is merely a medium for exchanging goods, and therefore, we don't need money itself, but the things money can buy. If you have $200,000 but can't spend it, your life isn't much different than if you had no money at all. So the government prints money and ensures its value on paper. You trust the government and use that money to buy things, but the real value of money isn't guaranteed by anyone. It fluctuates. The real value of money is always eroded by inflation. For example, in 2010, a kilogram of bananas cost $2, but 5 years later, the same kilogram cost $6. The value of money decreased threefold. Inflation is normal, and the rate of inflation is inversely related to people's trust in the currency. When inflation rises too quickly, people quickly lose trust in the money. This happened in Zimbabwe about 2 decades ago during their hyperinflation crisis. Inflation soared to 79.6 billion% in 2008, leading to the abandonment of the Zimbabwean dollar in favor of foreign currencies like the US dollar and the South African rand. People rushed to convert their local currency to more stable foreign currencies, causing the local currency to become virtually worthless. During that time, the Zimbabwean dollar depreciated rapidly, and everyone rushed to convert their dong to USD. Because money is a face of the government, this implicitly means that people trust the American government more than their own government, no offense intended, just economics. For example, in 2010, $5 could buy you 10 kilograms of rice, but by 2011, the same 10 kilograms of rice cost $15, while still only costing $5 in USD. So would you hold USD or the local currency? Since the local currency was losing value, people didn't trust it, meaning they didn't trust the government, so they started hoarding USD. Even businesses began transacting in USD instead of the local currency. This only worsened the problem. Initially, the currency was devaluing, and when people lost trust and stopped using it, its value declined even further. This situation is critical because when people don't trust their currency, it not only disrupts the economy, but also erodes the government's credibility. The government tried to address this by issuing various regulations banning transactions in foreign currencies, but they couldn't stop people from hoarding USD without risking riots. People's hoarding of USD depleted the state's foreign currency reserves as they converted all their local currency to USD at banks. Eventually, the central bank had to offer higher interest rates on savings accounts to encourage people to convert USD back to the local currency. This is why we see the current interest rates offered by banks, such as Bank of America in January 2017. As you can see, trillions of dollars flow in and out of the global economy based solely on 2 words: trust. Trust in the legal system, social institutions, technology, and each other. This is true everywhere, even in the criminal underworld or drug trade. If drug lords don't trust each other, they'll resort to violence to settle disputes, weakening each other, as seen in Mexico's drug wars. So when someone tells you that big corporations are all about scams and theft to get rich, or that wealthy nations only use deceitful tactics, understand that they don't grasp what the economy is based on. The issue of public debt. Public debt has attracted a lot of attention in recent years, especially during the Greek debt crisis. This issue spread rapidly when images saying each person currently carries a debt of $10,000 were widely shared on social media, and articles about the pressures of public debt have been appearing consistently over the past 2 to 3 years. These articles revolve around the public debt ceiling of 65% of GDP, meaning if the economy has a total value of $100 billion, the national debt is $65 billion, and whether the debt ceiling should be raised. You can read one of the latest articles on this topic here on Forbes. But why are people worried about the public debt ratio being only 64 to 65% of GDP, while countries like the United States have a public debt equal to GDP at 106%, Belgium at 105%, Singapore, the second richest country in Southeast Asia, at 111%, and Japan at 237%. Yet they're not worried about defaulting? First, we must understand that debt is also part of a country's assets. If you study accounting and know about accounting formulas, this will make sense. In everyday life, when we hear about debt, it feels bad. It's best to live without owing anything. But on a large scale, debt is important. No company has enough capital to sustain operations and invest without borrowing. Companies always need to take on debt, whether it's Google, Microsoft, or Apple. At the national level, it's similar. Depending on development policies, a country can have more or less debt. If they have good policies, $1 of debt can generate $3 or $4 in profit. If not, it might only cover the debt repayment. Usually, when people hear about high public debt, they're afraid, and we often say overburdened by debt. But in reality, when a country manages its debt well, it doesn't even need to reduce debt and can continue to increase it. A nation's debt only becomes a problem when the country cannot repay the debt. Creditors believe the country cannot repay the debt. Sounds simple, right? But if you think about it, a country can borrow as much as it wants as long as it can repay the debt. Borrowing isn't limited by a 65% GDP threshold or any specific number. If Japan can maintain a public debt of 237% of GDP, it means they can still repay their debt. The US can do the same, even with a debt of 106% GDP, approximately $15 trillion, and they can still repay it. Therefore, they aren't worried about public debt. In contrast, Greece had a debt of 300 billion euros in 2016 and faced severe economic challenges, leading to bailouts from the European Union and the International Monetary Fund. Comparing debt sizes between two countries is misleading. You should compare their ability to repay. However, when comparing debt repayment, we must also consider domestic debt versus foreign debt. When the government raises funds for a project, it can borrow money domestically or from international organizations through bonds or loans. Therefore, saying each person is carrying a debt of $10,000 isn't entirely accurate because a portion of that debt is individuals owing other individuals. Usually, the government only worries about foreign debt because they can default on domestic debt or print money to repay it. It sounds ridiculous, but in reality, the scenario where the government defaults on foreign debt is far worse than the government defaulting on domestic debt. If the government defaults domestically, people might get angry, the economy could suffer, but it would eventually stabilize, and the people, out of patriotism, would be willing to lend money to help the government. However, with foreign creditors, the government can't simply print money to repay debts because it has to pay in foreign currencies. So the government must find ways to repay. If the government defaults, it will hardly be able to borrow in the future, meaning there would be no money to build subways, ports, roads, or hospitals. The sad part is that in some countries, the government primarily owes foreign creditors and owes very little domestically. Moreover, the government's debt calculations are somewhat evasive, excluding state-owned enterprises' debts from public debt even though the repayment obligations of these enterprises, like certain national airlines or utilities, are effectively the government's responsibility. In some countries, the Ministry of Finance does not include state-owned enterprise, so debts in public debt, only accounting for the government and public administration's debts. Therefore, public debt doesn't include the debts of SOS. However, SOS hold a large portion of national assets and control essential business sectors: electricity, oil and gas, mining, finance, telecommunications, so their debts are also substantial. For example, in the case of a major national utility, even though its debt wasn't counted in public debt, when the group became unable to pay on the international market, the government couldn't ignore its repayment obligations. If it did, the public corporation's credit rating would drop, forcing interest rates to rise, and they still couldn't issue enough to cover the annual budget deficit. This means that the actual public debt in some countries is much higher than what the government reports. We should also consider the US bond market. Suppose the US government needs money for a large project and decides to borrow. They issue bonds with various maturities and, of course, different interest rates. If you're an investor and decide to buy a short-term 3-month bond at 1% interest with a face value of $1 million, it means that after 3 months, you'll get back $1 million plus $10,000 in interest. From the US government's perspective, they're holding your $1 million, making a profit of $1.5 million after 3 months, then paying you back $1.01 million and keeping the remaining for $191,000. By buying the bond, you've increased the US public debt by $1 million, but you don't worry about the US being in debt. You just care that you'll get your $1 million plus interest back. As long as borrowed money generates profit, the US government doesn't need to worry about the amount of debt. The US bond market is extremely attractive because the US government has a high credit rating, allowing people to confidently buy long-term bonds without fearing they'll lose money. This is why businesses and foreign governments, including countries like China and members of the European Union, invest trillions of dollars in US bonds, contributing to the growth of US public debt. Therefore, public debt in the US isn't a burden on the country. It indicates the attractiveness of its financial environment. According to the US Department of the Treasury, Country X holds at least $12 billion in US government bonds. The debt the US owes to us increased by 3.5 times from early 2012 to late 2014. Country X is currently among the top 50 largest creditors of the US. In reality, how much a country lends to the US reflects the country's strength more than being a burden on the US, thanks to the status of the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency and the stability of its economic and political systems. The US dollar has long been the main reserve currency globally. Additionally, even though the US national debt was $18 trillion in 2015, half of that, over $9 trillion, was domestic debt, meaning Americans owed each other, and only $9 trillion was foreign debt. Therefore, Americans aren't worried about defaulting. In 2014, foreign debt accounted for only 34% of the US public debt, with the remaining being Americans owing each other. Looking back at economics, unlike Marxist economic theories, Western European and American economic schools focus more on resource distribution and view human history as being shaped by resource distribution activities, such as buying, selling, and exchanging goods, rather than class struggle. Although the global economy has changed significantly since Adam Smith's time, its core issues remain: how to distribute resources fairly, reduce income inequality, and help the poor access resources to uplift themselves out of poverty. Even when humans create virtual products like video games, Bitcoin, or online companies, we still define them as assets and use the economic principles we've learned to distribute them. We provide internet services just as we provide clean water to people. In the next article, we will explore other aspects of an economy. As I explained in my previous article, the purpose of economics is to find ways to distribute resources in society efficiently. For the economy to function, it requires everyone in society to trust one another. I've written an additional piece explaining this concept of trust, which is somewhat different from the everyday notion of trust we commonly use. Before diving into the main topic, let's explore a bit more about the nature of economics. Can we call economics a science? It can be both yes and no. First, let's understand what defines a scientific discipline. A scientific field specializes in researching and explaining natural phenomena. For example, why is fire hot? Why does water freeze? The scientific research process involves collecting data, analyzing the data, developing a model that explains how things work based on the data, testing that model. If the model aligns with reality, it is considered correct. If not, it is revised. Similarly, economists collect data, develop theoretical models to study, and test these models. However, a disappointing aspect is that their models rarely have predictive power. In physics, you can predict outcomes based on different data inputs, such as the speed of a falling object, the impact force of a bullet, or the boiling time of water. But economics is slightly different. The same model, when fed real-world data, often produces results that contradict predictions. This is because humans are complex beings, unpredictable, always conflicting, and constantly changing. Unlike a bullet or an apple in Newton's laws, humans cannot be described with just a few graph curves. Therefore, although economics is conducted like a scientific discipline, it does not possess the same predictive qualities as natural sciences. It is quite hybrid, earning it the nickname the unreliable science because it often inaccurately predicts events. Quite unfortunate, isn't it? However, the human nature inherently desires prediction, which is essential for business and helps people understand their direction. Despite the unpredictable nature of economics, humans still enjoy making predictions, leading to dozens of different theories attempting to describe the same phenomena. Explaining capitalism and communism, at the core of economics is the study of resource distribution in society. So, what constitutes a reasonable distribution? In the past century, there have been two major theories addressing this issue: capitalism and communism. Many of you have likely been taught about communist theory in political science classes at university. However, in this article, I approached the topic slightly differently than what's typically taught. First, economics, like any scientific field, is predictive rather than declarative. When economists like Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, or Friedrich Hayek write their books, they present their theories and explain why they believe they are correct. They do not assert their theories as absolute truths and are open to criticism. Even in natural sciences, such as Einstein's theory of relativity, he stated that if someone found evidence disproving his theory, he would immediately accept it. This openness means that sometimes you might read an article claiming scientists have proven an object can travel faster than light. This is why you can find numerous books criticizing Milton Friedman or free market theories. Therefore, I disagree with the university approach that presents these theories as truths or certainties. Secondly, we must understand that scientific research does not involve subjective feelings. In our society, we are sensitive to this. Merely hearing the US or the West often conjures negative connotations. If they criticize our theories, we might dismiss it as defamation or propaganda. Perhaps this is why scientific spirit in our society remains weak, as people believe that information from over there is mere propaganda or skewed by political ideologies. We should recognize that the scientific community, true to its name, works very diligently. For instance, when you read a scientific article stating why the ABC economic model failed, it's not because the authors hate the model or are being paid by any organization to write the article. Instead, it's because they have studied the model for decades, collected thousands of data points, and conducted thorough research. When they publish their findings, dozens of other scientists scrutinize every aspect of that report to dismantle it. If it withstands these challenges, it gets published. Of course, when such an article appears on Facebook through a news page, a massive army might flood the comments claiming it's fake news, followed by trolls and memes. We shouldn't respond that way. Instead, we should respect the scientists' efforts and intellectual work, refraining from immediately criticizing anything that contradicts our own thoughts. Example from Dr. Wilfredo Thomas, Lamar University. For example, in one section, I wrote that afternoon workouts are best for muscle growth because hormone levels and body temperature are optimal during the afternoon. How do I know this? I conducted a 20-page research study on the topic, and the paper was reviewed and approved by 30 peer-reviewed studies. Then someone jumped in and accused me of lying, claiming that men's hormone levels peak in the morning because young men are stiff in the mornings. Sticking to 19th century capitalist and communist theories for clarity. Additionally, to make things easier to understand, I will stick to the 19th century theories of capitalism and communism, as modern versions are too complex. Returning to the main topic, how resource distribution differs between market economics and communism. So how does resource distribution in a market economy differ from that in communism? Imagine you're thirsty and walk into a grocery store to buy a can of Coca-Cola for $1. Why does that can cost $1? Capitalist explanation. Supply and demand in a free market. Capitalism explains the $1 price based on market supply and demand. When Coca-Cola starts producing soda in the US, they first study the demand for soda among American consumers, say 100,000 cans a day. After researching the market and determining they need to supply 100,000 cans daily, they calculate the production costs for 100,000 cans, including transportation costs, labor fees, and what price consumers are willing to pay. After evaluating these factors, they decide that each can should cost $1. At this price, 100,000 cans will be sold. If they raise the price to $1.10, perhaps only 80,000 cans will be sold, leaving 20,000 cans unsold, which is wasteful. Conversely, if they lower the price to 90 cents, their profits per can decrease. Therefore, companies always aim to maximize profits by finding the optimal price point. Marxist explanation: labor value and surplus value. Marxist communism, however, views the $1 price differently. According to Marx, the $1 reflects the labor value of the capitalist Coca-Cola's owner and the workers combined. He formulated the equation money, goods, money. First, the capitalist uses money to buy the labor power of workers to create goods. Then, they sell the goods to retrieve the money. The outgoing money is greater than the incoming money because the goods sold have increased in value compared to the raw materials used to produce them. This process creates surplus value. According to Karl Marx, surplus value is the difference between the value paid to workers for their labor and the value of the goods produced by those workers. Using the Coca-Cola can example, the labor value might be 70 cents, but the worker only receives 30 cents, meaning the capitalist takes 40 cents as surplus value. Marx argues that capitalism is inherently exploitative, as capitalists always exploit workers to accumulate wealth. If workers were paid more, they would no longer be dependent on capitalists. Economic models: capitalist versus communist. These differing perspectives lead to two distinct economic models. Capitalist economic model: free market policies. Capitalists support free market policies because they believe that when resources are freely distributed according to supply and demand, everyone can obtain what they want within their purchasing power. Capitalists advocate for free markets. Everyone can sell what they want and buy what they need. Free trade between countries, like within ASEAN, and free movement, such as within the European Union. When they talk about freedom, they refer to these concepts. To ensure this freedom, capitalist countries allow individuals to own private property, such as personal land and wealth. By permitting private ownership, individuals in capitalism can accumulate wealth. Communist economic model: class struggle and central planning. Marxist supporters, however, have a different perspective. They view economic issues not through the lens of resource distribution, but as class struggle conflict between different social classes, namely workers and capitalists. Capitalists own the means of production, but do nothing else, profiting by exploiting workers. They believe that eliminating capitalist corporations and ensuring equal distribution of goods will eliminate class struggle, leading to a peaceful society. To achieve this, they argue that free markets must be abolished, and the state must control all aspects of the economy, essentially a centrally planned economy. For example, the state would mandate Coca-Cola to produce a specific number of cans each day, calculate the necessary aluminum for those cans, and order aluminum factories to produce the required amount. Similarly, the state would determine how much paint is needed for the can shells and direct paint factories to supply that amount to Coca-Cola. Thus, all these decisions that were once made by Coca-Cola are now dictated by the state. After producing the specified number of cans, the state distributes them to everyone through a voucher system, ensuring everyone gets the same amount of Coca-Cola, with no one receiving more or less than others. This creates an equitable society. Moreover, communist regimes eliminate private ownership because allowing individuals to own property would enable them to accumulate wealth, leading to social inequality. In the United States today, while private property is allowed, certain assets are regulated to prevent extreme inequalities. Challenges of centralized planning in communism. One critical issue for centrally planned economies is determining societal needs. This is challenging because 1. Changing needs. Societal needs constantly evolve. For example, if a product becomes unpopular, such as a particular brand of soda, consumers might boycott it. How does the state respond to such rapid changes? It's difficult because production plans are set in advance and cannot be quickly adjusted. Additionally, since all decisions are centralized, changes take a long time to implement. 2. Scale of calculation. Societal needs are vast and beyond the government's ability to accurately calculate. To determine demand, the state would need to account for every individual package produced, every unit of raw material, and every component necessary for manufacturing. In the 1960s, the Soviet Union attempted to solve this by employing top mathematicians to develop supercomputers for calculating societal needs, but ultimately failed. 3. Desire for inequality. Not everyone desires equality. In society, there are always individuals who strive to surpass others, earning more money than their peers. These individuals might break the law to accumulate wealth and could be prosecuted as counter-revolutionaries and punished according to their country's laws. 4. Price determination. The most severe issue with communist economic models is price determination. Marxist theory posits that the value of a commodity reflects the labor effort exerted by workers, not market supply and demand. However, ignoring market demand makes it nearly impossible to accurately determine prices. Incorrect pricing disrupts economic development. For example, if an iPhone costs $100 and rice costs $500 per kilogram, why is that? Consider the following example. A $2,000 armored vehicle demolished and sold for scrap. Mr. John Smith invested $2,000 and many years developing an armored vehicle, hoping it would be used by the US military. According to Marx's formula, the vehicle should be valued at more than $2,000, accounting for the labor value Mr. Smith and the workers invested. However, the vehicle's actual value is $0 because there is no demand for it. The military doesn't need that vehicle, and no civilians are interested in buying it. Thus, regardless of how much money or effort went into producing it, its value remains $0. In centralized economies like the Soviet Union before 1991 or Communist Vietnam before 1986, societies consistently struggled with buying and selling because commodity prices were random and did not reflect societal needs accurately. The free market in capitalism. In theory, a perfect free market is ideal, but in reality, creating a perfect free market is nearly impossible. The market is imperfect due to asymmetric information, a situation where buyers and sellers do not have equal knowledge. For a perfect free market, buyers and sellers must fully understand each other, which is not feasible in real life. For instance, when choosing a university, you cannot be 100% certain from the outset if a particular school suits you. Similarly, many people migrate for work abroad, only to discover upon arrival that they have been sold into forced labor. Therefore, free markets always require government intervention to prevent social ills arising from information disparities. Currently, all nations, including the US, the UK, France, Singapore, Australia, and others, maintain market economies with varying degrees of government intervention. The difference lies in the level and manner of government intervention. In the US and the UK, it is minimal, whereas in countries like Canada, intervention is more pronounced. For example, the US government allows gasoline prices to fluctuate based on the market, while other countries might regulate fuel prices to stabilize the economy. Income inequality in free markets. Another serious issue in free market economies is income inequality. To understand this, imagine you are born into a wealthy family and have investment savvy. One day, through a connection, you learn that the government is about to build a subway line in your impoverished neighborhood. You decide to invest in real estate in your area, buying 10 plots of land at $100,000 each, totaling $1 million. Since the neighborhood is poor with many vacant lots, land prices are very low. After purchasing, you wait. After 1 year, the land price increases to $150,000 per plot, and someone offers to buy, but you refuse. In year 2, prices rise to $250,000 per plot, and you still don't sell. By the 3rd and 4th years, prices keep climbing. In year 5, land prices reach $500,000 per plot, and you decide to sell, earning $5 million of five-fold profit from your initial investment. You've legally made money without deceiving anyone. However, your method of making money poses problems for the economy. 1. Resource wastage. By holding on to the land and refusing to sell, you've wasted that land's potential for 5 years. People who needed housing couldn't move in, and businesses like stores, theaters, or grocery shops couldn't establish themselves there. Instead of contributing to the economy and providing housing for many, the 10 plots lay unused, overgrown with weeds for 5 years. 2. Speculation. Your holding of the land, known as speculation, has created land scarcity, driving up land prices, a phenomenon often referred to as the real estate bubble. As land prices rise, so do housing prices, making homeownership unaffordable for low-income individuals. The wealthy, like you, become richer, while the poor struggle to escape poverty. However, this isn't your fault. Post-1991, shift to mixed economies. After 1991, the centralized Soviet model vanished from the world. Countries that previously followed centralized economic models, like China and Russia, have transitioned to mixed economies, still market-based, but with the government controlling key industries. For example, state-owned enterprises like large shipbuilding corporations, national electric companies, and major oil and gas firms. Even in mixed economies, the primary model remains the market economy. The complexity of modern market economies. Today's market economies have become more complex as people, aided by advanced technology, can engage in various business forms. New business models like Airbnb, Uber, Grab, or Amazon have emerged in the past decade. These new models bring many benefits, but also pose more complex challenges for governments, such as income inequality, information theft, and unemployment due to automation. While these issues differ, they all revolve around the fundamental nature of resource distribution in society.